Several of you across this channel have asked me about Welsh historical film, what films are there to learn Welsh by or to listen to it, what's available, and I'm here to tell you that there is a horrendous lack of films in the Welsh language, and I'm going to, in this video, talk about ones we can make because our history is so rich and full of possible epic films that we could make. And for those Welsh who are watching, please just get off your bums and make films about your own country. No one's going to do it for you. This is Ben Llewellyn. We're talking about Welsh historical films today that we could make. Let's jump into the video. I'm not including Owen Glyndŵr in this video because it's already obvious we need to make a film about him. But how this video is going to work, I'm going to list 7 historical events and I'm going to explain each one, and then I'm going to go through what kind of film I would make following each historical event. And I should note, I would prefer if these were all in the Welsh language, of course, because we direly need epic level films in the Welsh language. So to bring my point home, one of these I'm just going to speak in Welsh whilst I do so, a rhoi isdeitlau I lawr, and put subtitles below when I do that one. The first historical event I shall mention here is Terfysgoedd Merthyr, the Merthyr Rising. In 1831, after several months of simmering unrest, years really, protests broke out in May in the town of Merthyr, a quite industrialized place, about wages being lowered, the cost of food higher, and working conditions not exactly fair. Protests in May built up to armed resistance by the 2nd of June. Rebels between 7,000 and 10,000 armed took to the streets and took over the town. They raised the red flag, probably for the first time, certainly in the UK. And I should note, this was not a socialist or communist symbol, and this was not a socialist event. This was pre that. You could say it was a precursor, but none of that ideology was involved. It was about their rights. It wasn't about the state being invasive into people's lives. And they took over the town. They beat back armed regiments from the British state. They actually won a battle. It spread. It looked like for a moment it was going to spread all across all of South Wales. Reinforcements were brought in quite quickly and it was suppressed. 23, maybe 24 people died. I'll put the number here. That's significant. And a man was wrongly hanged. And people shipped to Australia. So this was quite brutal. Now, what kind of film would I make about this event? I would accentuate in a film that this was a Welsh-speaking town. This was an urban environment where the Welsh language was dominant. Slogans, Caws y bara, I lawr ar y brenin, bread and cheese, down with the king, were shouted by this crowd. And they formed armed militias and regiments in the Welsh language. They set up a command and control centre, preparing for a wider struggle in the Welsh language. That's significant. And I would like to bring to your attention the modern film, Pride, in which people from London, homosexuals, went to support the miners' strike in the 80s. And they could have included much more Welsh in this, but they just gave it a word here, a word there, not even more than perhaps 10 words really in the whole film. And what I would do differently about this Merthyr Uprising film is I would have most of the conversations through the entire film in Welsh, but then I wouldn't just sprinkle it in with a word of English here and there. No, I would switch an entire conversation for 5-10 minutes in English and then back to Welsh. I would switch back and forth between the languages that way to show that this was not just something that you sprinkled a word on here or there. That's what I would do. I would focus on the community, the linguistic aspect, the relation between the two languages, Welsh and English. Because Penyderyn House, which was kind of the last bastion of non-rebels, they were speaking English, but the rebels were clearly speaking Welsh, and that's interesting. Let's get into the next film. Philip Jones Griffiths, a photojournalist from Rhiwllon in Sir Ddinbych. He went to Vietnam, and he was there from 1966 until 1971. 5 years is quite significant. And he took photographs of the Vietnam War, creating a book, Vietnam Ink, which then was given to many American people, and from this point on, people were seeing images, empathetic, human, kind, gentle images, surrounded by these images of suffering. And that turned the tide of the American public against the Vietnam War. One of the first times in history that a photographer has changed public opinion so much in a new and profound way with human empathy. And he was a Welshman. So what kind of film would I make about this man? I would have him going to Vietnam, 1966, and have you ever seen 7 Years in Tibet with Brad Pitt? He goes there knowing nothing about the culture, and over 7 years he grows with characters, forms friendships. It's a human story. I would make sure that this film about Philip Jones Griffiths was a human story of friendships. Perhaps fictional, yes, but surrounded by the truths of his life. Because to make the photographs that he did, which swung American tides against the war and the public, you would have to have formed lasting friendships with other human beings in another culture that is not yours. And his photographs do suggest that, a kindness, a humility, a willingness to show compassion to your fellow human beings. That is what I would focus this film upon. Welsh is a land of princes, a patchwork of competing kingdoms stretched for most of 1,000 years, and you had hundreds and hundreds of princes during that time. So I didn't want to include too many here because there's other historical events too besides the age of the princes, but you can't ignore the fact that it's a deeply rich and romantic period of Welsh history. Griffiths. His life alone could provide several films, and that's what I want to get to. What was his life? He was a Viking Welsh king, multiple roots. He played on an international stage, and he was forced to retake his kingdom, Gwynedd, 3 times. He used guerrilla warfare against the new Norman adversary, and he built churches and, we think, reinvigorated the Welsh poetic and musical tradition. This man forced Wales to re-establish itself and push the Norman invaders back, and then echoing forward in a period of stability that allowed it breathing room. He was tenacious to take your kingdom back 3 times, and he used fleets sailing back between Ireland and Gwynedd. He was resilient. So what kind of film would I make about this man? Given that there were 3 separate reigns, or 4 depending upon how you count it, this man could produce an epic 3-part series on the level of Lord of the Rings or Star Wars. The original Star Wars, not the rubbish new one with people with emotional insecurities playing heroes. Anyway, Griffiths. I would create a separate film for each one of his 3 main reigns, depending upon which reign it was. And I would then break that apart, being released a couple years after each other, to build up that anticipation, to build up a story that people feel lasts years. And each one of these alone could be 2.5 hours, because we have a story written about him, not during his life, but immediately after, in the time of his son. We have a lot of evidence about this man, which we don't have from many Welsh kings of the period. So I think we should take advantage of the fact we have so much historical evidence of this man's life and make a seriously epic level film about his life. In 1839, there had been years of discontent in the West Wales, of course. There were higher taxes and the price of goods was less for farmers, meaning that they were able to make less money. There were tolls, meaning that to ship on the roads you paid additional taxes, and they began putting them intentionally at places to where you couldn't even get around your own area without paying taxes. The rents were going up and the wages were going down. And as you saw with the Merthyr uprising, this was the same period-ish. These were serious conditions and people were suffering under the ideology coming from London at the time, which some today are trying to reimpose, but that's another story. In 1839, in Cymraeg, that's Carmarthenshire, in Abertawe, a group attacked one of these toll booths on the roads. They were bar tolls, meaning you had to go through a little kind of a turnstile. It was quite humiliating, and it was ruining the economic fortunes of these people. And they just weren't going to take it anymore, and they smashed it up and destroyed it. And riots broke out, and it kind of calmed down a bit, but within a couple of years it really spread and broke up again. And one key feature of this is that these men were dressed like women a lot of the time, like Rebecca. And there's a quote in the Bible about Rebecca and Gates, and they were quite proudly religious, and so they dressed as if they were Rebecca. And they became known as Merched Becca, the daughters of Becca, saying that they're followers of this biblical figure, claiming, they believed they were genuinely right in a moral, virtuous sense. And it spread because Wales at this time was deeply religious, and they saw this as a just thing to do. And frankly, the situations were quite dire, and you had troops being brought in, and the more tolls were destroyed. A woman was killed, kind of came to a head after that. But the lasting effect was the tolls were gradually removed, the law was reformed. The rents didn't really change as they had hoped, but there were some changes, and this action, this protest, did bring about some change. So what kind of film would I make about this? I would make a comedy. We haven't had a comedy on this list yet. We need one. You can't be serious all the time, can you? And men dressing up as women and destroying toll booths and wrecking highways and causing general mischief and mayhem, that could be quite hilarious, right? So I think we need a film that's a comedy about these riots, maybe even a musical, frankly. I think it would be quite hilarious. Yeah, let's have a comedy for this one. Abertawe, y Brenin Arthur. Nawr, dyn nhw wedi cael llwyth o ffilmiau am y Brenin Arthur drwy'r blynyddoedd. Yn benodol, yn ystod y 90au, mi oedd cyfnod bach o greu fath o ffilmiau. Ond mae un peth ar y goll yn does. Ble mae'r ffilmiau am y Brenin Arthur yn ei iaith ei hunan. Y Saeson neu y Sacsoniaid ar y iaith Saesneg y byddai'n creu maes o law. Ac dwi'n meddwl dylen ni creu ffilm sy'n fwy hanesyddol ac o fwy o safbwynt Cymraeg ac yn ei Gymraeg ynghylch y Brenin Arthur. Oherwydd beth oedd y Brenin Arthur? Rhyw fath o gadlwydd, rhyw fath o gad dern sydd wedi casglu bobl at ei gilydd a ffurfio rhyw fath o dernas, ac mi oedd hon yn oes dywyll llawn. Mae'r ddwy ganrif rhwng Gadawiad a Rhufain dechrau y 5yd ganrif. Ar y 6yd ganrif, mae gen i llai nag 20 o bobl ym Mhrydain oll. Da ni'n gwybod bod nhw wedi bodoli. Ond mae'r dyn hwn, y Brenin Arthur, wedi aros yn ein meddwl fel chweddol. Rhywun o'r cyfnod hwn sydd wedi ceisio rhoi trefn a heddwch yn y tir a cadw yr ymwariad band. Ac hoffwn ni bwysleisio mewn ffilm a gyda llaw, dwi'n cymryd yn geniatawol, ti'n gwybod beth oedd King Arthur. So, does yma ein gymaint o gyd-testun hanesyddol. A fath o ffilm byddwn ni'n creu, nid yn unig yn Gymraeg, ond rhywbeth sy'n ymddreiddio yn hanes y wlad. Am sut mae hunaniaeth y Cymru wedi dechrau o'r cyfnod hwn asio agwedda Rhufeinig ac agwedda Prydeinig ynghyd, ac dyna oedd ffynon i rym i bob pwbs. Romano-British. A dwi'n meddwl mae wir ddiffyg ac mae'n dweud llawer am y Cymru. Na'r oes llawer o ffilmiau neu llawer o sôn am y Brenin Arthur yn y Gymraeg. O safpwynt ffilm fodern, mae un nôl yn y 30 o rhywbeth, ond mae un rhywbeth nawr. Back to the modern era. The bombing of Swansea, or as I'm going to say in this video from now on, Abertawe, the Welsh name. The bombing of Abertawe, February 19th to 21st, 1941, by the Nazis. This was horrific. The entire town centre was obliterated. And what's most horrific is not that we lost a town centre, is which town centre we lost. This was Wales's answer to Newtown, Edinburgh, or parts of Bristol. This was our great trading city that emerged out of industry, that refined its architecture, and we lost that. It's a terrible shame. And what's even perhaps the most shameful thing is what we put in its place. I mean, I love Abertawe. I love the region, the borough. I love the people. But the middle of Abertawe is ugly. It is hideous. This new post-war architecture, when cities like Warsaw rebuilt their city as it was pre-war. And I just wish Abertawe had the wisdom, or would have the wisdom someday, to say no, enough of this cheap post-war fabrication. We're going to build Abertawe as it was, as a defiant statement to the Nazi scum. But this fire that engulfed this city and killed many people, I'll put the number here. How would I craft a film around this bombing by the Luftwaffe? I would not make the bombing itself the feature of the film. I would make it the backdrop that gives it an intensity and spurs a plot. I would create some type of extended love triangle that's in the middle of spinning into fruition and end as the bombs hit, in the middle of the plot. Not the end of the film, but the middle, which gives it some kind of twist that changes things, that changes how the people interact with each other. And then, in the wreckage of this, the plot winds to its end, so that you have no idea when you begin the film that it's going to have this deep interruption. And I would do that because I want to show how much this bombing interrupted the lives of these people and cut them off, and Abertawe off from its own roots, and severed it, going into this lost postmodern mindset, which created this frankly horrific modern architecture. And I would, in the first parts of the film, highlight the beauty of the architecture of Abertawe that was, and in the second part, after the passage of time, the absence of soul after that ends on an empty note, a feeling of loss, a feeling of, a love that could have been, much like Abertawe itself. At the height of the largest empire in the history of the world, the British Empire, a Welshman was in charge. I don't think that's something quite a few Welsh are comfortable with. It's true. And he was a Welsh speaker raised in Llanymstydwy, in Gwynedd, well, then Carnarvonshire. And his legacy is long-lasting in more ways than we can probably count here. He originally was experimental with Welsh nationalism, but perhaps he came to his senses, realizing that he could enact far more change by being within the British establishment than without. And he came to power as Prime Minister in 1916, lasting all the way until 1922. He is the last Liberal Prime Minister. He brought forth the victory in the First World War. He brought forth changes in national insurance, the echoes of the beginning of the welfare state. He returned the Prince of Wales to Wales and gave us lots of mottos in buildings in Welsh, symbols, rebuilding a Welsh identity within the British imperial construct, when frankly the Welsh identity had stiffened and almost fossilized into death. Rigor mortis. He prevented that permanent stiffness, re-injecting life into the veins of Wales. Within the imperial mind, of course, he was Prime Minister of the greatest empire that ever was. He had to do it that way. But he got changes done that changed Wales forever. I would make a film accentuating on how he changed Wales, building up, showing him the lack of self-confidence and identity in Welshness before him, and then showing what kind of changes were done by him, and then toward the end of his life looking back at how Wales had changed because of him. I think we need to look at that, and that's why I put him first here and last. We need to appreciate how much he changed Wales, and that in fact his reign as Prime Minister and rise through the ranks of the Liberal Party within Wales was a revolution. If you've made it this far and watched to the end and you've enjoyed my content, thank you very much. And I would like to bring your attention, I have a Patreon page, and you can join me on here, giving a bit each month. And to support the channel means that I would be able to do this as a full-time job and bring you content much more frequently and of better quality once I'm able to do so. So if you'd like to help keep this channel running, please contribute. The Patreon page is below. And thank you for my 5 Patreons currently on the screen now. And as always, deeoer, thank you very much for watching. We'll see you next time.